Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Hey everybody, we are here today to talk about Florida bar exam results. Hi Megan, how are you?
Hi, doing well. How are you?
I'm good-ish, but then the Florida results came out and I'm less good-ish, I think I would say, about this overall. We're going to break down these results. We've got some interesting information and a little more detail than we've had in past years about how the pass rates were calculated than we normally have, correct?
Yeah. If you want to jump right into it, we can talk about what we're looking at for Florida. So our overall pass rate was 44% in Florida this year. How's that looking? How's that feeling for you, Jackson?
I said to you, it's a scary number, right? 44% for an overall pass rate just doesn't feel very good. And yet it's not terribly surprising. We've said all along that Florida would be the first big jurisdiction to come back with results, and it would tell us where the trend line is coming out of these February 2022 exams. That number makes me very nervous when I start to think about what California might look like, some other big states, and it gives me real concern that the bar exam is simply becoming an unfair test. I think that's the most honest thing I can say. It's just not something that in the old days, back when I took the Florida exam, you expected to pass. Today, I'm not sure that's really true. And we're going to break this down a little bit and try and show you where these scores came from. But the overall feeling doesn't give me warm fuzzies. Does it do that for you?
Yeah, it's certainly not an outlier. Sadly, sad to say, it's not been an outlier this February. We're seeing pretty low pass rates across the board. There are a couple states that have, I don't even want to say a couple. I think there's one state that's cracked 70%. But for the most part, these are real low. We're seeing lots of states in the 40s. Pennsylvania, I think, had a 37% pass rate overall for first time and repeaters. So yeah, we're certainly seeing some of these really bad numbers. I think it's worth keeping in mind that the National Conference of Bar Examiners, who does the UBE, is planning an overhaul of the test in a few years' time, which will shake up the way that even states like Florida do the bar exam, because they will not have the MBE such as it exists today anymore to use on their test. So certainly there's a feeling across the bar exam land that all is not right, and some major changes are going to be coming.
Yeah, and even though we're not going to discuss them in detail today, we did get the New York bar results just in, and their overall rate is 45%, so right where Florida was. And when you start seeing those big states come in at those numbers under 50%, that's got to make you really concerned. And of course, the repeater bar pass rate is even much worse, as we're going to talk about. So yeah, there are definitely things happening. Now, I also want to caution those of you, when we talk about this new bar exam in 2025, 2026, somewhere in that range, we don't know what that exam is going to look like in states like Florida. And we really don't know how they're going to approach it. And I would not recommend to anyone that you wait for that exam. In other words, I think the devil may still be better than the devil you don't know. But I do think, to Megan's point, it's starting to become clearer and clearer that this existing bar exam is broken. It just doesn't work very well. It's not a very good measure of whether people are competent to practice law. And so we're dealing with an artificial test, and we're getting these results that are pretty staggering to have to deal with. I'm pleased that we had students in Celebration Bar Review who passed, particularly since we tend to work with a lot of repeat bar takers, but still, it is just brutally difficult. And so if you're one of those people that got your results back in Florida and they weren't favorable, know that you are not alone. You're actually in the majority. That's very little consolation, I'm sure, but I think it's important to remember that.
Yeah, so let's talk about that repeater pass rate. So Florida does not actually release a repeater pass rate, which I always found very interesting. Pretty much every other state does, but Florida hides that information. We calculated it out using the data that they did provide, which I will say was verified by another organization that calculated it out as well. But this is not an official number. I do have to give this disclaimer. The Florida Bar has not stated that this is their number, but it does look like the repeater pass rate for Florida was 26%. That is very low. So yes, Jackson, when you said if you did not pass you and you were a repeater, you were in the majority. You weren't just in the majority, right? You were with the large bulk of the people who were repeating and taking this exam.
Yeah, and I think the implication of this is that, as you and I were talking offline, the 26% pass rate assuming that we're pretty close, and I think we are on this, means that you can't take this exam for granted. If you're a repeat bar taker in a state like Florida, or really any of these big states, you need to put in a substantial amount of effort, and you need to bring all of the tools in your toolbox to be able to pass the exam. What it also says to me is that if you're going to try and pass this exam by memorizing the law, reciting rules, and issue spotting, you're going to be part of the 75% that fail. There's just no question in my mind that those traditional approaches to taking the bar aren't working. They're certainly not working for repeaters, and they're not really working for a majority of the first-time takers either. So it's just not a good structure. And if you've done that previously and not been successful, doing it over and over again with these kinds of numbers does not give you much reason to be hopeful about passing the exam. So I think you really got to look at doing something different. And the numbers really would seem to suggest that to us. So pretty staggering. The other interesting part to me is that for the first time, really, that I can recall, Florida released their results on the people that just took day one, that's the Florida part or part A, and the people that just took day two, which was the multi-state only. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so they said that 209 of their applicants took Part A only, and of that, 151 or 72% of them passed. I find that very interesting. So it's basically, I'm not surprised though. So basically, what that means is if you had already previously passed the multi-state and you only had to sit for the essays and the Florida multiple choice part, the majority of those people did fine and were able to pass. I'm not surprised by that. I think if you have a good enough handle on the exam to pass the MBE, then you probably have the ability to pass the written and the Florida portion as well. Jackson, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. And it also suggests to me that because Florida has this unique structure in which you can pass one part of the exam, bank that score for 2 years, and then take the next, it's not a bad strategy sometimes to just get that passing score on one part of the exam and then put all your efforts into the other part. We had several students that did that with success. And I think it just makes sense not having to go back. And there was a time when we would say, maybe you should try to take the MBE anyway and bump that score up. That time has long since passed. I think that now, if you've got a passing multi-state, just go in and take the Florida score.
Yeah. And then on the other side, however, with applicants who took Part B, very different story. And again, I'm not super surprised by this, but 231 applicants only took the MBE. So that's the national multi-state portion. And of that, only 81 passed, which is 35%. So real low numbers. And again, these are people who've passed the Florida portion of the exam, but couldn't get over the hump with the MBE.
And I think that leads us to ask about the MBE generally, because now we've got some MBE numbers. We're starting to get enough data here. And the national conference released some data about the multi-state, didn't they?
Yes, they did. So every year, the national conference releases their data on the multi-state. Obviously, this is before most states have released, but they have all of the MBE scores in, obviously, right away. And so this is reflective of everyone who took the MBE across the country. The mean score was 132.6. And I will say this is very consistent with past years. I think it does speak to the reliability of the MBE portion of the test. That if you look at this chart, the score since 2018 in February, this is comparing all the February, the score has fluctuated between 132.6 and 134. It has literally stayed so consistent pretty much every February. And yeah, this was not a particularly difficult or outlier at all MBE exam. This was really what you can expect on basically any February MBE exam you take. It's going to look pretty much exactly like this one.
Yeah, and so it's interesting then when you take that number and you go back to these Part B applicants, this is an interesting juxtaposition. You've got people that are just studying for the MBE and only 35% of them pass. So that should give you some hesitation, right? That this test is a bear cat. And 132 is the average. You need 136 in Florida. You need 133 or better in New York. You need a 130 for a couple of states in the UBE. And in lovely California, you need a 138. So there's a lot of range there, and we're just not seeing those numbers come in. So again, taking advantage of all of the tools to study for the MBE, I think is really important. We have seen some great results from students around the country in February of 2022 who were photo readers, who used mind maps, who used our approach of selective intuition and saw massive jumps in their MBE scores. But I will also tell you that there are people that tried the old-fashioned way of memorizing and doing flashcards and grinding their way through the exams, and they're just not getting the numbers that they need. The test is just not penetrable, I think, in that approach. I just don't think you can memorize and recite enough.
Yeah, I was sitting in on a California bar examiner meeting last week, and they were talking about how at this point you are expected to know thousands and thousands of laws in order to pass the bar exam. And I would say that's certainly true for the MBE. And there, I just don't know that you can possibly flashcard your way into understanding every possible thing that can be tested on the MBE. I know that's frustrating. It feels like you should be able to. It feels like they're asking you to, right? And so it feels unfair to say, gosh, they're telling me I need to know all of this information, but it's not, your brain is only capable of holding on to so much at any given moment. And so I think what this 35% rate shows for Part B is that most people who are trying, I would say the vast majority of people, maybe everyone except for our students, are using the memorization approach. It's not working for the MBE for many people, because that's not people who are like doing all this other stuff. They're just focused on the MBE, and memorizing just what you need for the MBE was only enough to get 35% of them over the hump. And I think there's just very little downside to trying it a different way and trying scary, but listening to what we're saying and trying to learn this in a way that's more intuitive, as opposed to cramming and forcing thousands of laws into your brain for the next couple months.
This is really an interesting opportunity to just get this little sample size of people just doing the MBE. We don't get that anywhere else. So here it is. We can just distill that down and say, wow, something is really not working for MBE applicants. So I think that's something to bear in mind. And as Megan said, it might feel a little scary, but we've been teaching this methodology for over 25 years, and we've got a terrific track record and lots of testimonials and videos from students who've done it. So you're really not taking a chance. I think you're taking a bigger chance by just continuing to repeat the same pattern when the numbers say you're just not going to be successful. I mean, statistically, you'd be better off going to the casino and putting all your money on the red chips. I think that there is this real sense of frustration in Florida about the exam. I also noted there were a couple of other statistics that the examiners gave us. One that stood out to me was if you were a first-time taker in Florida, but you went to a non-Florida law school, right? So ABA, but non-Florida law school, that pass rate for first-time takers was only 40%. So that's a really scary number, because that means that there are people coming from top 10 law schools outside of the state of Florida who can't pass. And when you've got 60% failing from outside of Florida, that's a little scary, right? I know you had to do that going from Virginia to California. It feels like you're in foreign territory a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that Florida is an interesting test case for this, because they do test a lot of Florida specific law. They have a Florida multiple choice section, as you all well know. And so I think it is very interesting that their pass rate is so low for people who are coming from out of state schools. But it's certainly just something that you've got to keep in mind if you're coming from that you're really going to have to drill down on some of these Florida specific laws that are very different than people taking the UBE, for instance.
Yeah. And you probably ought to work with a course like ours that actually knows Florida law. The other final number that I saw that was interesting was if you were already admitted to practice in another state. Now, of course, Florida makes you sit for the whole exam because it's Florida, but that was actually one of the most successful cohorts. It was a 73% pass rate for first-time takers who were trained attorneys admitted to the practice of law. So that's a good number, and that's reflective of what we see from our students. Particularly coming from the Northeast, let's say, those New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania lawyers coming down to Florida for first-time takers tend to pass pretty effectively. But part of the reason is because they've already moved away from this idea of memorization and recitation and issue spotting. They don't do that in their practice. And so I think it's an easier transition for them to the approach that we're talking about. And it seems to translate better in the exam results itself. One final note that I think it's worth pointing out. Florida is the only jurisdiction that I can think of might be wrong. The only one I can think of that does not publish a repeater pass rate. That's a little weird, isn't it?
Yeah, I do think that is a strange thing. I'm not surprised though. I think Florida is one of the more secretive bar exam organizations in the country. California being the most transparent, I think. California publishes statistics on racial disparities in the test. They have for going back since the 80s. It's commissioned studies on things. We know New York just commissioned some studies on repeat takers and what was working and what wasn't. Some of these other jurisdictions are much more open about potential problems with the exam, which I think a repeater pass rate is a potential problem. It's showing you, hey, you see these really low numbers. It raises questions about the efficacy of the law schools in your state. It raises questions about racial disparities. It raises questions about the validity of the test. And I think that Florida is not necessarily the most open or willing to have those kind of conversations as a bar organization.
That's right. And it creates this weird cycle because one of the things that happens here in Florida is that they do publish the rates of first-time pass rates by law schools in Florida. But the law schools, and I'm not saying all of them, but several of them have played an interesting game here. The way that Florida bar examiners count a first-time taker is that you're only a first-time taker if you sit in the first bar exam after your class graduates. So let's say that you graduated in December of 2021. If you did not sit for the February 2022 exam, you just sat it out, you will not be considered a first-time taker when you sit for the exam, let's say in July of 2022. So I know this won't stun some of you, but some of the law schools in Florida encourage the bottom members of their class, the most vulnerable members of their class, the ones that they think might have trouble passing, to sit out an exam so that they are not counted in the first-time taker pass rate. And they do that in a couple of different ways. They give them study stipends to stay out. They encourage them to spend more time before they sit for the exam and so on. In other words, what's happening is there's some manipulation going on of this first-time taker pass rate. And I think it reflects in the fact that Florida exam will only publish that rate. They don't want to show the repeater rate because I'm not sure they actually believe the repeater rate given what's going on with some of the schools here. It's a weird world. It is the opposite of transparent on both ends, both the law schools and the bar examiners. And so I was surprised. This is the first time I can remember the Florida bar examiners actually identifying how many people took Part A only and how many people took Part B only. That was new information for us.
Yeah. So hopefully this was helpful for people to break it down and hear what's going on. Congratulations to everyone who has passed in Florida. We're so proud of you. And also, I'm going to say congratulations to the students we have who passed one part and you just need to do the second. I know it's disappointing, but it's also a huge weight off your shoulders that you are done. You do not have to study for that section that you passed. And now you can really focus in on just one. And for most of them, I think they were pretty close to passing the section that they missed.
We had some one-pointers and it hurts, right? When you fail by a point, that's subjective, right? It's pretty tough to say, that didn't happen by accident. So I think that it remains this very difficult culture here, remains a very difficult exam. Just so you know, only 443 people out of 1,788 have been approved to be sworn in after this exam. So between character and fitness and passing the exam and all those pieces, for a state the size of Florida to only have 443 new members of the bar, that's a very low number. Yeah, we've just been full of happy, cheery news today. I think it's important to keep in mind that it is possible to pass the exam. If you come to this process, if you're open-minded, if you do what we ask you to do, if you take advantage of the tools that we offer, and there are a variety of them, from coaching, writing workshops, to dealing with photo reading and mind mapping and mindset work, you can be successful on this exam. And we see that happening, even if you've taken and failed the exam previously. And I will say there's also a big cohort here in Florida of people who are not English-speaking, native English speakers. A lot of Spanish speakers here, as you might expect. And it's a challenging exam for Spanish speakers. To be sure, if you're coming from Puerto Rico, in particular in law school there, it is a tough exam. But we see a fair number of those students literally clawing out one part of the exam and then going to the next and finishing that off. And so does it take you longer? Yeah. Is that unfortunate? Definitely. but it is ultimately you're going to get through. So we encourage you to talk to us about your scores. Let us know what it is you've been doing, and we will be glad to offer our suggestions and to show you how we can help you make the next bar exam your last bar exam, which is why we're here. Any other thoughts you want to wrap up with, Megan, for today?
No, keep at it. We're so proud of the effort that everyone's put in, and we are here for you. Whatever you need, let us know. And we want your success just as badly as you want it. Please, we are resources here for you. June is as well. The group coaches, everyone at Celebration Bar Review. We care very deeply about your eventual success on the bar. So congratulations to people who passed, and we're with you, and condolences if you weren't successful this time. We hope to help do everything in our power to get you there.
Absolutely. All right. We'll see you again next time. We'll be talking about New York results and other results as they come in across the country. Thanks, Megan, for being with us. And thank you all. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.